Free will is a marvelous probe of how we think the mind works, the nature of consciousness, and issues of morality and justice. I first spoke with Professor Daniel Dennett about free will in Boston in 2007, and then again in Tucson in 2014. Visit Dan's homepage at closertotruth.com. Dan is famously a determinist about free will, but in ways subtle and sophisticated. Dan has a new book coming out about free will called Just Desserts Debating Free Will. I asked Dan what he has learned about free will since last we spoke, as he surprises in store. If you like these conversations, subscribe to the channel. We publish videos on the big questions of cosmos, consciousness, and meaning every day. Dan, we've talked about free will in 2007 and 2014, and I want to see what your thinking has been since then. You are famously a compatibilist, asserting the truths of both determinism and free will, your kind of free will, the one you say is worth having. So what have you learned, and can you convince your critics?
Well, one thing I've learned is that free will is a topic that philosophers just won't let go of, and they seem to me sometimes to cling to an answer just because it lets them stay in the game. And they tend to view me as a bit of a taking the ball and going home, saying, look, that's just not an issue. It's not an important issue. There's lots of ways of defining free will, and in some of those ways, we don't have free will, but it doesn't matter. Who would care? The one that matters, the one that gives our lives meaning and makes us responsible, that's perfectly compatible with determinism. And I think I've got some new ways of saying the mistakes that the people are making who think that they should be incompatibilists. They're confused about the nature of determinism, for one thing.
Well, incompatibilists would say that if there is determinism, you can't have free will. And so if you want free will, you have to eliminate determinism, which in science seems rather difficult, or you have to change the definition of free will. And so people who are your critics, who are incompatibilists, what are their arguments, and why are they weak?
I think the single biggest problem is that they confuse determinism or causation with control. Okay. The world's determined, or to the extent that it isn't, it doesn't make any difference. Let me give you a very simple example. Flip a coin. It's determined to come up heads or tails, but it's out of the control of you. It's out of the control of everything. It's not being controlled. It's being caused by basically every atom in the universe to land heads or tails as it does. But that's something that you can't interfere with, and it's something that can't control the flip of a coin. The coin flips are designed to be uncontrollable by coin flippers, and we can be pretty sure that a flip of a coin is, as one often says, as good as random. Now, that's not indeterministic randomness, but it's all the randomness you need for evolution, for instance, and it gives you all the elbow room you need to make choices.
Okay, I would follow you up to the last comment, because when you make your choices, you're adding the human element, and we're getting into consciousness and what is mentality, and is there a difference between mentality and the flow of the universe that led to the flip of the coin?
Yeah, and what I think people have to understand is that human beings are not they're not angels, and they don't have special immaterial minds that make the difference, and they don't have to tap into quantum indeterminacy in any way. But they are very special because they're self-controllers. They're autonomous. They are parts of the universe that are able to control their own trajectories to a significant degree. And that's what we want. We want to be able to control our lives. And determinism doesn't say anything about our not being able to control our lives. An example I like to use now is think of a boulder that's been dislodged in an earthquake and it's rolling down the mountainside. Its path is determined, but nothing is controlling it. It's just, it's as good as a random roll down the hill. Gravity is doing the main work, but every little bump it takes it one way or another. But now think of a skier skiing down the same slope. The skier is just as determined as the boulder is, but the skier's in control. Unless, of course, she isn't. If she flies out of control, then she's more like the boulder. But determinism has nothing to do with whether she's in control or not. Being in control is what we want, and that doesn't mean being free of causation. It just means having the capacity to anticipate and adjust your bodily postures, your actions, in light of what you want to do. That's what control is.
Control, as you've defined it, would give me everything I want in free will. So I grant you that. But what I don't see is how that articulates with the basic definition of determinism. If you knew every law and the initial condition of the universe, everything then in the physical world is determined. There is no differentiation, even though you may feel that you have control, you really don't. So that's the crux of the matter, and how you differentiate, how you get control out of a deterministic universe.
Yeah. Well, you raise an interesting prospect, but I don't think you want to take it that seriously. If you want to say if determinism is true, then control is an illusion. Nothing is ever in control of anything. Well, look around you, folks. There's all sorts of things controlling all sorts of things. Your refrigerator and your thermostat and your self-driving car in a few years. These are all systems that are to some degree autonomous. They have control systems. Control theory is a perfectly respectable part of engineering.
Sure.
And, it's not a fantasy. Some things are well controlled by their control systems, and some things aren't. And the key word there is well. You want to be not just controlled, you want to be well controlled. You want to be controlled so that the things that happen are the things that you want to happen. And what's magnificent about us, human beings, is that we have not only the sense organs so that we can see incoming bricks and curves in the road and things like that, we can think way ahead and plan our activities in anticipation of things which could throw us out of control. One of the great examples of this, of course, is Ulysses, when he wants to go between Scylla and Charybdis and he wants to hear the sirens sing. He knows he will be out of control if he doesn't block the ears of his oarsmen with wax and then have himself tied to the mast so that he temporarily cedes control. But that's the act of a self-controller who's looking ahead. And human beings are very good at anticipating places where they're likely to go out of control and taking steps now so that when that time comes, they won't do things that they regret.
Does your definition of control in any way undermine traditional definitions of determinism?
No, not at all. Determinism means everything's caused, but it doesn't say that everything's controlled. Control requires an agent who is a controller, or an agent that is a controller, because, of course, now with AI and autonomous cars and things like that, we have lots of devices which are to some degree autonomous. And the key to that is that they have their control systems, if you like, on board. They're not remote controlled by some other agent somewhere else. Now, if we were puppets, and one of the favorite metaphors of people talking about free will is, if determinism is true, we're just puppets. No. If determinism is true, then we're determined. But whether we're puppets depends on whether we control our own strings or whether some other controller controls them. I certainly don't want anybody else in the world controlling me. I want to control myself, so I protect myself against would-be controllers. That's what free will is all about. And that actually fits very well with our traditional ideas about responsibility. If somebody hypnotizes you and can get you to commit some evil deed, you're not responsible for that because you weren't in control of yourself. The hypnotist was the one who was in control. If he turns you into a puppet, then you've lost your free will. It has nothing to do with determinism. It has to do with whether the agency that you exhibit is yours or some other agent's.
Dan, in discussing free will, one of your core ideas is that control is not causation, and the two are segregated. And when you deal with a deterministic world, the concept of control is strong. So my problem with it and trying to understand it seems to me that control, if determinism is hard and fast, control is like an epiphenomena. Looks like it's doing something like foam on the waves, but it really isn't.
Well, look around the world and you see lots of things that are controlled and lots of things that aren't. And it doesn't seem to me illusory at all. If you've got a drone and you're controlling it using the remote controller, and you turn the remote controller off, the thing spins out of control. It's determined in both cases. In one case, it's controlled by you. In one case, it's controlled by nothing. It's just like a leaf in the wind. And the concept of control is very important, and people tend to confuse it with the idea of causation. The past doesn't control you. And the reason it doesn't control you is that there's no feedback to the past. The past can't anticipate. You are what you are because of the past that you've had, and the past before that going way back to the Big Bang. But whether or not you're in control is a matter of what's true of you now and whether any other agent is in control of you. And the difference between agents that are in control of things and things that aren't in control at all seems to me to be entirely realistic. There's no illusion about it at all.
If that's true, I'm with you on that. But isn't that libertarian free will, where there is no determinism? You have causation, but causation is not the same thing as determinism.
Determinism is just saying that causation reigns at the macroscopic level throughout the universe. And it as good as does, because adding quantum indeterminism doesn't improve anything.
I agree with you there.
That's an important point. I think that you couldn't do any better as a self-controlling autonomous agent if you were able to harness quantum indeterminism. The only way that you could do better, I had a long argument with Bob Doyle about this. I finally admitted to him that I could conceive of one circumstance where I would want quantum indeterminism to be harnessable by me. And that was if I was playing rock, paper, and scissors with God for high stakes.
Okay.
Otherwise, every day, the randomness of flipping a coin, the randomness of throwing dice is all the randomness I need. I do need randomness. It's very important to have a good supply of deterministic chaos, randomness in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Coin flip, dice throwing, that comes in very handy to, among other things, it protects us from becoming money pumps to people who can anticipate what we're going to do. We want to keep our choices a little bit random. It's like playing rock, paper, and scissors.
Okay, in that game, I would not bet on God. I just want you to know. You talk about that determinism does not rule out autonomy. So, using autonomy and control as synonymous, or is there subtle differences?
Well, autonomy just means self-controlled. Heteronomy is controlled by another.
Okay.
If you think of, I love the example of the Viking spacecraft many years ago, sent to Mars, and when they got too far away from planet Earth, the engineers could no longer reliably control them. The return signals just took too long.
Right.
So they figured out a very clever way of offloading control to the Vikings themselves, made them autonomous. Of course, a Viking spacecraft only had about 7 or 8 or 10 things that it could do, but whether it did them was something that was determined by it, not by anything that happened, at Cape Canaveral or in Houston or at Caltech.
Is there a distinction between the way other philosophers are using the word determinism and the way you're using it? Because in your determinism is close to a process of causation, which can be modified, I don't know if that's the right term, by control, by your self-control, or by inanimate control, as in the Viking spacecraft. But when other people talk about determinism, it seems to be that based on the laws of physics and the initial conditions of the universe, however ineffably complex, that the sequence of events has been determined and cannot be otherwise. That's why this phrase is often used, are you able to do otherwise, as the sort of the key question when you're asking if libertarian free will is possible.
What I mean by determinism is what physicists and cosmologists mean by determinism. There's no special exemptions for things that are autonomous. You can't, in a way, change the future. It's a trivial point, but the future is whatever will happen.
Yes.
And if you're just given a stretch of space-time and the motion of all the atoms therein, you really can't tell whether determinism or indeterminism is true, because in an indeterministic world, it happens that the future follows the past, and you may not know or be able to figure out whether there's any high regularities that set this up, or whether there's some quantum indeterminacy. I think the whole idea of quantum indeterminacy is a red herring that has appealed to many philosophers and many other people who think about free will, because they've somehow imagined that they can't be free unless the action they perform is absolutely, strictly unpredictable at all by any set of laws. But that's just an inflated idea of what you need. The main thing you need is to be able to surprise the people you're around, the people you're dealing with. And if you can have a poker face and keep your own counsel and make your own decisions, then you have all the freedom from prediction that's necessary. And that really is necessary. People are not mistaken when they are worried about, say, a magician forcing a card on them. This is a lovely example, I think. A really good card magician can take a deck of cards and say, pick a card, any card, and get you to pick the card he wants you to pick.
Yeah.
A friend of mine who was a magician once forced the jack of diamonds on me 7 times in a row. And I was doing everything I could to thwart him, but he still did it. That's unnerving. That's scary.
Yeah.
And we should be scared about things like that. There are ways that other agents can latch onto what a poker player would call the tells that we exhibit, or can in some other way subtly influence our behavior. We do have to watch out for that, because to the extent that we let other people influence us without our acquiescence and knowledge, to that extent we don't have free will.
So is there a fundamental difference between the universe determining a sequence of events that will lead the future to be what the future is, and that cannot change, and the capacity to intervene through control and alter that?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by a difference.
Well, let me maybe put it this way. You made a very interesting point that we cannot distinguish for sure between whether the universe is deterministic or indeterministic. I think that's a very profound point, because most people think you can one way or the other.
When people think about determinism, one of the metaphors they often use is your life is sort of like on railway tracks, the railway tracks of causation. You're going to go where the tracks make you go. But that's just wrong. Railroad tracks really do prevent you from, they cut off degrees of freedom that you have. That's why being a train conductor, an engineer is it's not rocket science, because basically there's only a few degrees of freedom. Stop, go backward and forward. That's it.
Yeah.
The tracks take care of everything else. Well, we're not like that at all. At any moment, there are 1,000 different ways we can act, 1,000 different things we can think about. And that doesn't mean that determinism isn't true. It just means that we have many degrees of freedom, many more than a drone, many more than a locomotive.
Dan, as a determinist, one of the critical questions is, how do you deal with moral responsibility if everything is determined? There are many determinists who take the view that, therefore, there is no real moral responsibility for things that people do, although we have social requirements that force us to lock people up, but we're doing it for social order, not for moral responsibility. You disagree with that, and tell me about the argument and why you take your position.
I don't see the contrast that a lot of philosophers see between moral responsibility and socially designed and constructed policies and institutions. I think that moral responsibility is one of civilization's great inventions. It's not the invention with any particular author. It is something which has grown up. There's variations around the globe. People have different views about it, but it's something which makes civilization possible. And so I'm completely a consequentialist, as one would say, about the justification of holding people responsible. If you hold people responsible, then you can live in a free state where you can be secure and have the friends you want and make long-term projects and count on people to keep their promises and all the rest of that. It's without that, without moral responsibility, we're pretty much back to the state of nature where life is nasty, brutish, and short. So does that mean that moral responsibility isn't real, that it's just a social convention? No, it doesn't mean that any more than the fact that money is a social convention means that money isn't real. You might say money is an elaborate fiction. Well, it's pretty real if you don't have any, especially. It's another great innovation of Homo sapiens, thanks to civilization and cultural evolution. So, holding people responsible is the best game in town. It's earned its high regard, not because God told us we're responsible. It has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with the plain, natural fact that one species, and one species only on the planet now, namely Homo sapiens, has the competence to be held responsible, to be moved by reasons, and to make a promise. Many years ago, Nietzsche said to breed an animal that can make a promise is, well, he said it was something that required a lot of violence and blood, and historically, I think that's true. We can leave aside the blood and violence pretty much, but the negative side of moral responsibility, holding people responsible for their crimes, holding children responsible for the mischief and bad deeds that they do, the promises they break, and so forth. There have to be consequences. And there have to be consequences because that's the way we train people to be good citizens, and so that we can let them free and allow them the freedom of the state. If we couldn't do that, this would be a terrifying planet to live on. We want to be able to trust people and to trust them to recognize that they have duties and obligations. Some people have tried to replace the idea of punishment with moral education or just quarantine, but it doesn't. I have yet to see a system that really does away with punishment. That's simply part of the price we pay for civilization.
Look, there's no doubt that what you say is correct in terms of the functioning of institutions, indeed the functioning of society. Give you all of that. The deeper question that maybe has no social relevance, but it does have philosophical and even ontological relevance as far as what human beings are, is if there were no social consequences of bad actions, this wild counterfactual, would you still be in favor of holding people responsible as a determinist if there were no social implications of it?
Well, this is a case that was imagined by Kant, among others. And if you try to create the bizarre circumstance where there just aren't any negative social consequences of not holding somebody responsible, then I suppose in principle we could say, yes, in that case, it wouldn't make any real difference whether we punished people. Kant notoriously said that if we knew the world was ending, we should take the people on death row and execute them before the world ended, which is the sort of reductio ad absurdum of that idea.
Right. Right.
And most people shrink from that. There's got to be a good reason, a very good reason, to punish somebody, because punishment is doing them some hurt. It's got to hurt. It's got to be something they really don't want. And so we have to have a very good reason for that. But we have lots of good reasons for doing it, as long as we have a system which is fair, which is equitable, which determines the facts in a reasonable way to a moral certainty, as we say. You can think of it as the rules of the game. These are the rules of the game of civilization, and it's the best game in town. We all want to play it.
It's certainly the best game in town, but if you had someone who did something wrong, is there some universal moral responsibility to implement justice in some moral way? Not religion, no God in any of this, no command, nothing like that. But it is morality such that there has to be some justice in order to balance the universal books?
Well, we have to look at all the factors that would hinge on this. For instance, secret punishment is ruled out. And ask the retributivists why. It's not clear why they think secret punishment is such a bad thing, but it obviously is. Because it's very important that we set precedents that people know that they're properly informed by their fellow citizens of the penalties that they will likely incur if they transgress in various ways. It's interesting, if we look at young children who are just learning this, we do countenance, in effect, secret punishment. We let parents chastise their children without revealing to the rest of the world that their children haven't quite got their act together yet. We temper justice with mercy. But that's for children. That's for people who can't do any better yet. The idea that we should treat everybody as a child is, I think, bizarrely inappropriate. It would turn civilization into a horror show. We don't want to do that.
I hope you enjoyed watching. To see more conversations, subscribe to Closer to Truth's YouTube channel.